WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we're the Recovery Boys. How about that, Lewis?
We nailed it again.
Yeah, we're
We're
just
incredible,
scary.
aren't we? Wow,
Yeah.
2 in a row.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of awards they have for radio shows. We should clearly get Best Addiction.
Just for showing up.
Yeah, well, as I said,
Participation trophies.
We're the number one rated addiction and recovery talk show in the state. Maybe
That's
in the
right.
Southeast, because it's the only one that we know of. So it's easy for us. How's everything at Wellwind?
Very well. Very well.
Good.
Things are not calming down.
Staying busy.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, this is a business that we never really have a season. Every day is a season in our business, that's for sure.
Pretty much.
So we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. You can go to our website, therecoveryboys.com. If you want to listen to us online, if you want to send us an email, there's a contact tab there. You can send us an email. We'll get back to you with an answer. If you want to call us, there's 2 numbers. You can call us, 866-465-3110, or locally 919-774-4653. And we'd love to hear from our listeners. For those that are listening to us online or maybe going to listen to the podcast later in the week, if you have a question, concern, if you just need some help, send us an email and we will get back to you as soon as we can possibly do that. So, Lewis, let's check in with Kayle tonight, see how she's doing. Good evening, Kayle.
Hey, how are you?
We're good, thanks. How are you doing?
This week's been a little rough. I lost my little girl's uncle to this disease Sunday.
I am so sorry. I'm so sorry, Kayle. You know what? It's unfortunate, but sometimes those are the things that remind us just how life and death our disease is. I'm so sorry you're having to go through that.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. Today it's not something that I want to use over. You know, in the past it would have immediately, that's what I would have run to, just to numb it, you know. But I don't want to use today. And, you know, that's just the direct result of how plugged in I am to this program and, you know, the ladies I have in my network today and the relationship I have with God today.
Well, God, you know, that's it's so awesome to hear. You know, one of the things I was going to ask you about is the things that you get out of, we know how it feels to have people help us, but when you help other people, it does such a, it gives us such a wonderful feeling. I mean, it really helps us with our recovery. Part of our recovery is based on helping other people. So I understand how important when you're going through these things. Well, listen, I'm so sorry. Anything that you want to say? Anything? Any thoughts that come to mind based on what you're going through?
You know, he fought this disease for a long time, and I just want to remind people, you know, no matter how bad the situation looks, or, you know, it's not worth using over, because you might not get another chance. You know,
it's funny. I'm going through. I got a couple of really difficult cases right now, and I've used that reasoning with a couple of these folks that you can die from this disease, and of course, you know, as you know, it absolutely will kill people. It kills people every day, and unfortunately, it hits close to home sometimes, and it really reminds us of how dangerous it is. And I know for me personally, I got so close to that. So I'm sorry you're going through it. And you're right. I mean, if anybody out there is wondering whether this is something that we try and, you know, use the death of somebody to scare somebody, we're not trying to scare anybody. We're just trying to inform you that these are the facts. Sometimes a person's bottom is death, and it's unfortunate, but it happens every day.
So, Kayle,
yeah, that makes 6 people. I've been in recovery this time a few days short of 7 months. and that's the sixth person I've lost in 7 months.
Kayle, what do you think is different with you now that wouldn't have been in the past, that has allowed you to kind of process this and not use?
Just knowing that, the way I'm feeling now isn't going to last forever, and just the relationship I have with my sponsor today. I've used her a lot this week. She's been a godsend this week for sure.
Well, and you probably have people counting on you too, and you realize that as
I
well.
do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, listen, good for you. For this is all spiritual growth that we in recovery, if we're fortunate and we can get a foothold in recovery, that spiritual growth is it's a wonderful thing to experience. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes really dark days for us to lean on that spiritual growth and that spiritual strength. But as you say, you have to live for the moment, and it'll things will get better. You will live through this, and hopefully you'll walk away with it with some knowledge that maybe will serve you or serve somebody else down the road.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, listen, thanks so much for calling. We'll check in with you next week, and thoughts and prayers with you, okay?
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Kayle.
That's
Bye-bye.
That's Lewis. That's it happens, and it happens. I mean, unfortunately, it happens way too often, and it strikes home, awful close to home. If we get nothing else out of this show over the course of the length of time that we do it, is to make people understand how dangerous the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction is.
Very much so. Oh, yeah.
And so next week, I'll let you introduce our guest. We have an in-studio guest tonight we're very excited about. Local, actually, a Greenville girl, so I can already tell you that she's very special because only special people come from Greenville. Did I ever tell you that, Lewis?
Is that the short bus special?
Yes, exactly right. But next week, we're going to have Constance and Harold Pearson in. Harold has been running the Samaritan Colony for quite some time. Samaritan Colony is a treatment center, 12-bed facility down in Rockingham that do phenomenal work with not the kind of resources that some of the they make do on far less than some of the other places, and they do tremendous work. I go down there on Friday nights every once in a while and speak, and it's just it's a really cool place, and they're in the process of getting their funds put together, and we'll let them talk about next week, to have a women's facility on the same property. So we'll have them in next week and look forward to that. And Lewis, we enjoyed dinner,
Yes.
and we talked about bringing in some intervention cases as we build our show out, and we'll talk about that further in upcoming shows. But interventions, case management, all the things that we talked about at dinner are things that we want to introduce our listeners to and make sure that if they have a need of those services, how they work, how you can find them, hopefully be able to educate our listeners to that part of the business.
Well, and no one really goes into recovery or treatment without some form of intervention, whether it's the legal system, a family member, a friend. It's just it's amazing how that works. And of course, the kind of intervention you and I were referring to was more of a process, but interventions are real. Happen every day.
They are, and unfortunately, because of TV and because of there's a lot of bad information, disinformation about what an intervention is, and you hear people talk about running if they see one coming, and there's a lot of urban legends out there. And so what we want to do is we want to introduce our listeners to exactly what an intervention is and how it works, and the reason that they're so valuable and how they save lives, and not only the life of the addict or the alcoholic, but they also make the lives of the family members and their friends better.
Yep.
And that's the reason people do them. So with that, I will turn it over to you, and you can introduce our guest.
So this is a very special person, and if you're tuning in, well, you won't be able to see it now, but when it's on YouTube, you'll be able to see it. This is another episode of Beauty and the Beasts, plural. I'm introducing, this is Suzanne Brown. Suzanne is, I think she is, a friend of mine.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, all right. She's also young enough to be my daughter. But how long have we known each other now?
Gosh, 3 or 4 years?
3 or 4 years. Has it been that
Yeah.
long? Okay. Well, Suzanne comes to us by way of Chapel Hill, and she
Go
has
Tar Heels.
go. Thank you. Well, that's wrong season, but Suzanne has a thriving therapy business in Chapel Hill called Suzanne Brown Resources. Ironically, because she's Suzanne Brown. So,
That's it.
and I've been enchanted with her ever since I met her because she is steeped in the field of recovery. And I recently, I don't know why it took me this long to find out this about you, but I recently found out that you have a personal story that kind of dragged you into this thing. I would take it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because your background really didn't. I don't think you started out thinking this was going to be you're going to be a therapist, right?
It came and it went.
Right.
I came to it, and I came, took some detours along the way. So it is interesting. And, in this business, as you know, so we all have that personal story. And it really, bonds us together, I think, as we are out here helping folks.
Well, I can tell you, Macon and I wouldn't be here ordinarily. And we got here by, well, we were honest by it, weren't we, Macon?
Yeah, we absolutely.
So, Suzanne, if you don't mind, kind of start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning.
You came from Greenville.
I came from
A
Greenville.
humble, upstanding young lady in Greenville. But what kind of brought you to this area?
Well, my parents met in high school, actually, in Roanoke Rapids.
Okay.
So we're all raised up in North Carolina, and they ended up moving to Greenville and starting their family. So they had my sister, who was 9 years older than me, and then I came along. I think I was a little bit of an oops 9 years
Sounds
later.
like it.
But my mom says the best oops that ever happened.
She has to say that,
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Okay.
I know. I choose to believe it.
Okay.
I choose to believe it. And like so many of us, my parents are young and new parents and trying to do the best that they can, and they're bringing with them, all their family's trauma and alcohol use and drug use on both sides of the family. And here they are trying to start new and start their own family. And, through that process, addiction also hit within our immediate family.
Sure.
My sister ended up developing an addiction to drugs when she got older. And so since I was 9 years younger, I really had this experience of being like the outsider looking in
Sure.
to my parents and my sister trying to navigate, and my parents having their prior experiences with alcohol in their families of origin and generations before, and just not knowing what to do.
How did you cope with that?
I became really self-reliant.
Okay.
I was determined not to add any more burden onto the family. I worked. I did well in school. I tried to maintain a job. I got my first job at 14. And so I really just tried to keep it moving, keep it together, make sure I was doing well so I didn't cause any more stress on the family. Now, this isn't anything my parents expected of me. But, as kids, we just naturally, intuitively fill in the spaces in our family, the missing pieces. We just do. We're smart when we're little. We don't oftentimes give little people so much credit. And so that's how I coped with it.
It's kind of like resilience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So we developed these survival skills, which in so many ways helped me throughout my entire life, but have also gotten in the way.
How did your parents deal with that?
Oh my gosh, lots of trial and error.
Now, how long ago was this?
Well, probably my sister's acting out probably started around 14, even before drugs were on board, right? And so drugs came on board and some other, just destructive behavior. And actually she was a little bit different in that the drugs came on board later, not until her later 20s.
So this was around, the mid-70s maybe? Mid-80s?
80s.
80s, okay.
80s and 90s, yeah.
So there was a lot less known about addiction
Yeah.
and all of this than there is now.
Oh, so much less. And it wasn't being talked about, right?
Right.
So the secrecy, the stigma, you don't want anybody to know. We don't talk about this, was just kind of the general rule of the day, because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing you can't control it. It's embarrassing the consequences of it. There's just a lot that's we didn't have the support then that we do now,
And yet the problem still exists.
The
right?
problem still exists. The
So,
problem still exists.
so you started noticing this at how old were you when you started noticing it was a problem?
I'd say that started begin noticing that something wasn't right when I was probably about 9, 10, 11.
Okay.
And then just increasingly, the interesting thing, and the families that I work with, I tell them this all the time, people get scared when the information doesn't add up, right? And so, oftentimes we're nervous to tell people the truth. My sister she was afraid of hurting all of us. I mean, she was hurting herself, right? But she was afraid of hurting the rest of us. And so the last thing that she wanted to share with us is that she was having an addiction problem. She was trying to protect us even in her addiction. And, unfortunately, that really limited how we were able to come at the issue, right? And the help that we could get her, if we're not admitting that it's a problem and we're not talking about it, then that really ties our hands. And so, she would have things that she would share with us that just wouldn't add up, with where she was or what she was doing or how things were missing or, all different types of things. And so that's really unsettling and unnerving, creates fear for safety when things just aren't adding up and you can't put the pieces together. And so that was probably a lot of my teenage years. And I think my parents trying their best to, the pieces weren't adding for them either, and just trying to set boundaries and love her and help her the best that they could. And you know what? Sometimes we got it right and sometimes we got it wrong.
So, what was the treatment protocols back then? Was there a treatment center? I don't think I've ever thought about it until as you described this. The 80s and 90s, it wasn't really a big industry, and I guess the state still had some facilities open at this point. But how did your sister? I mean, how did you address it with her? Was she a treatment? Did she go to treatment?
She did not go to treatment. She did not. I think she tried to piece together some things on her own, but she really struggled with receiving. Really wanted to try to handle things on her own. So at that time, the only thing, when I was younger, so I wasn't as involved in what that would have been. But at that time, the only thing I remember hearing as a young person was the Walter B. Jones.
Yeah.
In Tarboro.
Yeah.
Yep.
State Center. So I couldn't tell you.
Well, wasn't it also the time of year when the charter facilities were up and running, or is that after that?
I don't know. I just because we as a society didn't discuss it. If people went away, it was hush hush, and it was like, oh, I mean, it wasn't as openly discussed as it is today. Thank goodness that we have great treatment centers, and it's seen as the helping industry is seen as a good thing, not as a thing to be embarrassed about. But back then, I mean, it was just not talked about.
Well, we have great therapists too, like Suzanne. I mean, if they existed back then, I was totally unaware of them. I mean, and like your wife, Megan.
Yeah.
I mean, was there even a license called a licensed clinical addiction specialist back then?
I don't know. That would be some good history work to go and see, chart the progress of the profession. I know that they weren't giving out a lot of. People weren't chasing this with degrees in school. I mean, when I went back to school, my master's is only in addiction counseling, co-occurring disorders, and so I think back in the day, or back in the time we're talking about, I'm not sure that there was even that much of a. I'm not sure that there were programs designed to turn out addiction counselors. But that'd be a good. We'll find out. I'll commit
Yep.
to you to finding out the history of that.
So Suzanne, you're now what, in your teens?
Now in my teens, you know, because I loved arguing with my parents about what was right because I knew everything.
Well, of course, you're a teenager.
Right. I was determined I was going to be an attorney at first, and then I abandoned that, and I thought, maybe this psychology thing, maybe I want to help people. So I went to undergrad for psychology, and I minored in business, of all things. And once I graduated, I had no idea what population of people I wanted to work with. And I honestly wasn't mature enough to go to graduate school and begin working with other people. You know, I had some growing up to do and some learning and evolving to do. So I kind of bounced around to some different jobs after I graduated and tried some different counseling jobs, and it just wasn't fitting. And I kind of fell into banking, of all things.
Yeah, I mean, no one falls into banking.
I know.
How did that happen?
I know, it's crazy. I moved to California for a year and came back, right? And I went to go open my bank account, and they were like, "Where do you work?" And I said, "Actually, I don't have a job." And they said, "Oh, really? We're hiring." And I said, "Great, I have my updated resume in my car." Right? And I'd just been back from California for a day. And luckily, I had the foresight to update the resume before I even left Cali. So it just worked, and I thought, ooh, this is going to be a real temporary solution. This banking thing is too stuffy for me. This is not where my heart is, but I'll do this while I figure out where I go to grad school. And that turned into a wonderful, beautiful 12-year career.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah, it was so fun because you're helping people, right? I watched families grow up. I helped people realize their dreams. Now, granted, we were all kind of, you know, it was centered around the topic of finances, but you're helping, you know, finances are
Very personal.
very personal, very
Oh, yeah.
emotional. You know, we have a big emotions connected to that and to our dreams and what we want for ourselves and our families. So there were a lot of elements that I was feeding that part of my need to help. And that was a really good thing. And then I worked my way up through management and began coaching, sales coaching, and service coaching to the employees and staff, and that was a lot of fun too, helping them promote up and become better. So that was a lot of fun. And then all of a sudden, I fell out of love with banking.
What time frame was this?
This was when I fell out of love with banking. It was like in the probably 2008, 2009, after the crash happened.
Oh, yep.
And banking was changing a lot, and we were losing some of our autonomy, even those of us who were ethically, you know, doing business ethically. And so the other interesting thing, and you know what, we're always growing and evolving and putting pieces together. The other day I realized I had been doing a ton of my own therapy work at that point. And I didn't know how to do my job and be in tune with my emotions and the emotions of my employees. I was just the workhorse. I was going to go in, I was going to get it done, you know, that self-reliant muscle that I probably overworked. And so once I started getting in touch with my feelings and understanding myself better and tuning into other people and what their needs were, I just didn't know how to do that job anymore.
So you kind of conjured up a question. So did you see a lot of trauma after 2008, after the
Oh, yes.
So you saw all that coming in?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was working with families who were literally losing everything.
Mm.
So you really were a therapist back then to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. I appreciate that question. But yes, because at one point I was working in a branch in RTP, you know, in the Research Triangle area in Raleigh and Durham, and there was a lot of life devastation going on. Mm. It was tough.
What did you tell these folks when they would come in? Would you know the appropriate thing to tell them, or just, you know, listen?
A lot of times I just listened. You know, that was one of my first lessons that, you know, I'm a fixer, right? That's part of that self-reliant driven part of me. And that was a real hard lesson that's not my role all the time, but I can still be helpful. But that can be a really helpless feeling. That can be a really helpless feeling because you see people in so much pain. So yeah, that was when I learned listening it was often the best tool. And helping people, when they're in that really dark place, sometimes I really did have to look at people and say, there is nothing, right? Let's see what you can do to kind of just even feel safe and secure for your family. But there were some times where we were able to uncover things that they weren't thinking because, when we're in that deep, dark place and we're, experiencing that level of loss, we just don't see. So, sometimes I was able to shed light on possibilities that they just weren't connected to.
Well, that was a really dark time for the country in general.
Oh,
and individually, people were suffering like crazy.
Yeah.
People did some really drastic things back then. I remember vividly that happening.
Yeah, it was a traumatic time for our nation, I think. Really, it was.
So that was around 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And then?
And then I was like, ooh, I feel lost here, but this has been the last 12 years of my life, and I've loved it. What's going on? What do I do? And I went to see, I was already seeing my therapist for a long time, and then I went to see a life coach. And I said, I can't make any changes or think about changes because I have a mortgage and I have this and I have that. And, and she said, whoa. If we were to set all the hows aside, what is your vision? What do you see yourself doing? And I don't know where it came out of me, but it just came out. And I knew, I was like, I want to do this. I want to help people and I want to go back to school and I want to be a therapist. And I had this dream long ago and now I'm reconnected. All of a sudden in that moment, I reconnected to all that. And I want to teach people and I want to help people see that there's hope and there's healing and it's possible. So that was all kind of coming together. And simultaneously, my sister lost her battle with addiction. That all happened at the same time. And so that really, it just propelled me into, this is my calling. I've done my work. Of course, you always are doing the work. That's never done deal. But I know that I am here to help other people navigate this.
So I hate to interrupt you, but how did you deal with, your sister passed away.
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with that given the circumstances of the time? Was that 2009, 2010?
2009, yeah.
Okay. How did you deal with that?
Ooh, I cried a lot of tears.
How old was she when she passed away?
39. She
Wow.
passed away the month before her 40th birthday. And, I just, in therapy, that's where I could tap into my feelings. But when I was walking out in the world, I still kind of reverted back to I was in such a shock, I think. I reverted back to those old ways of just pushing on, doing the next thing you have to do on your to-do list. And then the more that I continued to work through it through therapy, which was growing on top of the work I'd already done before she passed away, I was able to hold that space for myself to have compassion for her and myself and my parents and her son, even just walking out in the world. But it was a process. It was an evolution for sure.
And also, how did your parents deal with that? I've said this often. It's, you never want to outlive a child.
No. My parents, you said the word resilient earlier. They are role models for strength and courage and resilience. They hold very strongly to their faith, and I think that's really what got them through. And of course, incredible friends and family came together, which was great. But I really think their faith was a huge pillar for them in coping with that, and continues to be. I can't imagine what it feels like to them to lose their firstborn. I just can't. And when I was the teenager, and we're nasty as teenagers, and we knew everything. So I'm not proud to say it, but I would just look at my parents and think, "You're doing this wrong."
Sure.
I'm so not proud to say that. But I just, the amount of compassion, and I'm like, that I felt for them and continue to feel for them. I just can't imagine what that would be like.
So you're going through a career change at the same time that you lost your sister.
Correct.
Wow. That's pretty dramatic. Plus you're watching your parents having to deal with this as well.
Right.
And you have a nephew that who obviously just lost his mother.
I just lost his mom.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were hurting.
Mm.
We were absolutely hurting. But you know what? I learned so much from watching my parents navigate that. I had no idea what that was going to be like for them. I'm like, either the wheels are going to come off and everyone's falling apart, or there's going to be some other process of this that I don't yet know. Like, I just didn't know what to expect, and their strength was just remarkable. And so that's when that really was speaking to me, because I was like, oh man, even when the worst thing happens, it's like we were talking about with Kayle earlier. The unfortunate reality with this, I think more people recover, but the unfortunate reality with this is that people die.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just an ugly, ugly truth. And even when that worst thing happens, the thing that we've been fearing the entire time happens, we can still come together and we can be okay. But when we're in that fear place, when we're trying so hard to keep the person that we love alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, desperately, we want to try to make it better, and we want to rescue, and we want to keep them alive, and we want to save them. We don't have any, it doesn't even seem like a possibility that we could still be okay even if the worst thing happens.
Yeah.
And what we know now is that we can't keep them any more alive than they can keep us alive.
No.
All we can do is do what we do and hope it turns out right.
Right. Because the drugs and alcohol, or maybe even some other destructive, addictive behavior, is not only unmanageable for them, but it's unmanageable for us.
Well, and there's also that the mess behind the drugs and alcohol that are creating the dynamic in the person, and you don't know. I mean, the drugs and alcohol are bad enough, but you don't know what that other thing is that's creating this dynamic in the person.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because now, through the later years of my sister's life, and then after her passing, we began learning about traumatic events she had in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And that created I hate that it took that, but it also created an opened conversation for my parents to have about traumatic experiences that have happened, through the generations of the family. So there was some unexpected healing through that.
Those conversations are amazing too, aren't they, when they happen? And unfortunately, sometimes it requires life-changing experiences to start the conversation, but it's amazing stuff that'll come out.
Yeah.
So this is 2009, and you made the turn about the same time. Tell me what that was like to go from banking to being a therapist.
I will tell you, it was the most invigorating, inspiring thing I've ever done in my life. Like, once I got over the hump of all the how-tos and I really could just see the vision of what I wanted, and it just was electrifying. And then it wasn't scary anymore. The excitement and inspiration of it outweighed any fear. And then the how-tos just melted away. It's like, well, I'll find a way. Yeah, all right, so let's sell the condo. Let's, how can we reduce expenses? How can we make this work? Let me get a laptop so I can even apply for this program. It started. This is one mantra that I really love. I wish I had it at that time, but I've come to get it since then. But it's move and the way will open. And I didn't realize at that time that's what was happening. Once I had that vision in my head, then that's what was going on. And so I really try to remember that in those times I'm feeling lost or scared or unsure.
You mean therapists go through that too?
Oh my gosh.
I thought it was just me.
That's a whole nother radio
Us.
show.
Us, excuse me, that's
I thought it
right.
was just us.
They're all, when you go into, I would think, as a therapist, there are all kinds of options. You obviously don't just handle addiction and recovery.
Right.
How did you kind of fall on that as the centerpiece of what your doing?
Yeah, good question. So I knew that, that was my calling. So I looked for programs for that. But I ended up going, instead of the psychology route, which I originally thought I would do, I ended up picking the clinical social work route. So I got my master's in social work from UNC Chapel Hill. And as I began to learn about all the different ways I could become a therapist, what I loved about the social work perspective is it was strengths based. And not to say anything poorly about psychology or any counseling program or anything like that, but just in my research, that's one thing that really drew me to it, because I didn't want to just come at it from an approach of like, this is the problem, this is the pathology, this is the diagnosis. I wanted to learn how, especially because I'm naturally kind of a black and white thinker sometimes, right? And so I really wanted a program that would help me step into a world where I was helping people realize all their resources and their strengths and how we could move forward.
I was going to ask you what that meant, but so you really mean, it really means, as opposed to focusing on the problem itself, you focus on the solutions.
Correct.
And what they have already innately in them that can help solve the problem.
Absolutely.
Is that a good definition of that?
That was beautiful.
Incredible. I had a moment of clarity. I must have actually paid attention in college at one point. I don't know.
Or maybe the brain finally kicked back on.
That's right. The fog is lifting.
Just took a little while. No, it's good. No, that was perfect. You said that beautifully. Absolutely. So, we're all walking around with these strengths. And when we have a problem, we feel so disconnected from our strengths. We often don't see them, or we don't, we just don't see them, or maybe no one ever, pointed them out to us, but we have them. And so helping people connect with that. And so when I went to UNC, I knew that I wanted to follow in the clinical social work track, and then get the substance use disorder certificate, an addiction certificate. And so I did that. And then while I was in my second year field placement at an outpatient treatment center, I had the pleasure of, the director secured a grant and brought in a family therapist in to do some training with us. And in that moment, I was like, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is, I want to help families who have experienced, who are being impacted by addiction. And so it just all lined up. Have you ever had those times in your life where you just knew you were right where you're supposed to be?
When I was in jail. I remember that's exactly where I needed to be at that moment.
Yeah. It's where you belonged at that moment.
Exactly right. So I wasn't getting back to the family component.
Oh, sure.
Because I think we on the outside look at the situation with someone who's going through an issue, even if it's not an addiction, and they think that that's the only person who needs help. But can you touch on what the family means in this process, and what they can do to help that person?
Yeah, such a good question. So, a lot of times we kind of get, I don't know if you've ever gotten this way, but you think the person with the problem, right? Which I don't like to use it that way, but that's how we often think. The person with the problem, if they would just get better, if they would just stop doing what they're doing, if they would just do what I told them to do, all of this would be better, right? And so we all become super hyper-focused in the family, super hyper-focused on the person that's in the most struggle, right? So, using. Well, and that makes sense. But here's the thing, is that when we're dealing with addiction, we're not talking about a problem that can be solved easily, right?
Sure.
When I've cut my hand, I want to put all my focus and attention on that, and I want to clean it, and I want to bandage it, and for that time it gets all my attention, but it's not taking all my attention for years of my life. In addiction, if we only focus on the problem and not realizing how it's impacting us and figuring out how to take care of ourselves, and it's just focused on this one central person, a lot gets disconnected and lost along the way, in the family and even with us as individuals. And so we see fear rise, we see resentments rise, we see our physical health of family members starts to deteriorate, finances start to deteriorate, right? We're all walking around frazzled and confused and hurt and scared, and we're not trusting. And and we don't know how to help each other. And so it impacts every single person in the family. So the idea is that we want to, of course, continue to love the person who's using, continue to love them, but also hold space for taking care of ourselves. You know, it's interesting what the research shows, and I can say anecdotally, just working with people in my office, what the research shows is that using family members benefit most when you can continue to give them love, set clear boundaries, right? So, and then to redirect your focus back to yourself and taking care of yourself.
But so often families tend to focus all their attention on the thing in the room.
Yep.
As opposed to what they actually can control,
Exactly.
which is their own behavior.
Their own behavior and their own feelings, yes. Their own well-being.
Yeah, Macon and I were talking about this before at dinner, about the intervention process specifically, but it holds true even more so in what you do, because therapy and counseling over a long period of time can help break through that. As an interventionist, our job is an immediacy to turn the family quickly, and then hopefully they get the therapy on the back end, which is why we refer a lot to families out to folks like you.
Yeah.
And a question, and I'm speaking from my own personal situation, because my kids and my ex-wife, they did when I was in trouble and when I was going through what I went through, all the focus was on me. 7 years removed from that now, in recovery, I see things in them that I know are a direct result from what they went through with me. And it, because I've educated myself in the disease, I'm also aware that the trauma they suffered from watching me go through is something that they're going to end up, it's not something you get over, it's something that you have to learn how to deal with. So I guess my question is, is that a lifetime journey? For my two daughters and my son and my ex-wife, that point when I was in the hospital and when I was unable to be their father and their husband, I don't know how that impacted them, but I know it did.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I guess I wonder, how can how can the person that's in recovery make sure that he tries or she tries to give back to those family members now, because the situation's almost reversed, and I want to focus on them as much as I can.
Sure.
And sometimes they allow me to, and then sometimes they don't. Sometimes that grief or that anger, because their life was fundamentally changed by my decisions and my addiction. And so, everything about their life is fundamentally changed.
Right.
And so I would hope that they would be able to get therapy, but those are the kind of people, do you work with those? Is that what you do? When you talk about family, because I know that my girls and my son tries to, he tries to plow through it, but my girls, they need somebody to talk to about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. About 50% of the folks that I work with meet criteria for substance use disorder, and are directly impacted by substance use. And then the other 50% of the folks that I work with are loved ones and family members, because we all need healing.
Yeah.
And, such a thoughtful question that you're asking, and, just your family's lucky you care about them, to think through that. But it is about, the family does experience trauma. It's like getting the late night phone call, or, seeing a number you don't recognize, or, all kinds of different things trigger this fear response. And it does take a lifetime, I think, to get over it, because we're talking about things that affect life and death, right? And the traumas, we experience small traumas, big traumas, all through our life. But, when life or death is involved,
right,
it really, increases how long I think it takes. Yeah,
and sometimes, it's not funny, but it is funny. these new phones now, they have tracking systems. And so with my kids and me, we can find your phone. And my daughter, every once in a while, my oldest daughter lives in Dallas, she'll see where I am.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if I happen to be at the hospital, there's a frantic call, Dad, what's wrong?
Yep.
She just assumes that it's a problem.
Absolutely.
It's not that I'm at the detox speaking to people, trying to help them. It's, and so it's been 7 years, and yet they're still sitting, they're waiting for the other foot to drop.
They're waiting for the other foot to drop. And, if we want to 2 seconds into physiology, right, that trauma response system, that's an automatic nervous system response, that happens within them in nanoseconds, just like a craving or an urge to use can in nanoseconds pop up for someone who's addicted. And so that's a real, automatic nervous system response that's going on for them, that fear. And so, you asked what's one thing that you can do, or what are some things that you can do? And I think, not getting angry, just knowing, oh, this is normal. It doesn't feel good that this happens to them, and that maybe some of the things that I did caused this, right? That doesn't feel good, but I'm just going to be here with them to help bring down the fear.
Right.
And I'm just, going to be here with them to help them settle and reassure them that all is okay. Because in essence, we all just love each other.
Yeah, and the thing that I've had to, and I'm sure other people in recovery, you've had to do is you have to own your part of it.
Sure.
And so, as you say, I expect them to be proud of me for 7 years of recovery. And that's one of the things Lewis and I laugh about it, that when I got out of treatment, there was no parade. I couldn't believe there wasn't a parade for me because I'd finished treatment. But, one of the things.
You missed yours.
That's right.
I had mine.
But, one of the things that I have to remind myself all the time is that they're always going to be concerned, and I've always got to be aware of that. And I can't, when they ask me something sometimes, or if they're irritated with me because they may be going through something in life that they would deem my responsibility because of what happened a long time ago, I still have to allow that because I did create that.
Right.
And I can't get upset with them
Right.
and say to them, well, listen, I'm doing the best I can, because one of the things that addicts and alcoholics we're so used to doing is protecting ourselves and instantly throwing up that wall.
Defense.
Absolutely.
And that can come off pretty nasty sometimes.
Oh, it has come off pretty nasty
Yeah.
sometimes, and this.
Because we don't want to be the bad guy.
We don't, but we are, and what, you just have to own it sometimes.
Right.
Well,
So I do have a question. So you get this practice up and running.
Yeah.
Around 2009, 2010.
Well, I went back to grad school. It took me a while to get things lined up to get to grad school. So I went to grad school in 11, graduated in 13, worked for an outpatient center for a bit, and then I got my practice up and running in 2017.
Okay. You and I have discussed it. I don't understand how anybody can ramp it up as quickly as you've done it. Who did you did you model your practice after someone or some thing?
Well, no. I mean, I had lots of good supports. My dear friend who you know well, Paige Armstrong, who owns Life Enrichment Resources in Raleigh, she's amazing. She's been, I met her originally in undergrad, and so she's just been a huge support through all of this. And so I'm sure that I took some things from her playbook for sure, because she also focuses on couples and relationships and addiction. So just, her positive, strengths-based, hopeful attitude. And then, but past that, I just created what felt right to me. And being out in the community, meeting other therapists and helping professionals, and seeing what the needs were of their loved ones, of their clients. Whether, hey, I'm working with a mom, and I'm working with a mom and her sons and with alcohol or whatever that is. I'll say another big influence has been, in addition to Paige and all the other therapists that I've worked with, is that family therapist who came in and did our training when I was still in grad school, Jean McClendon. She, who's in Chapel Hill, she trained a long time with therapist Virginia Satir. And so Virginia Satir was a social worker and a pioneer therapist in the family systems model back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so once, as Jean began to teach us Virginia Satir's model, it just made sense to me. It made sense to me, you know, with these philosophies and ideas that we're all doing the best we can at any moment in time. It might be piss poor, right? Might not be your personal best, might not be the best compared to somebody else, but with however we're resourced at that moment, we're doing the best that we can. And that as long as we're breathing, we have the opportunity to grow and change, right? And that change, you know, so I take that with the knowledge of, you know, that I've learned over the years that change doesn't always happen on my timeline, right?
Oh, yes.
Change does not happen on my timeline.
Yep.
And so, you know, but coming at it from that humanistic approach of like, okay, well, we all have shortcomings and we're all imperfect, but we all have a lot of strength and resilience too. And we always have, as long as we're breathing, we have that opportunity to consider new possibilities. And all I can do is express what I want and need and how I care for somebody else, set boundaries to protect myself physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, and then redirect my energy back to me and take care of me and hope that other people come along and join me. You know, one of the things Virginia Satir talks about in her family systems model is that we talk about the status quo change, you know, when we're changing from the way we've always done it, even if it's been painful and it hurts, you know, we get used to the way that we've always done it. And so when we start to begin to change that, you know, sometimes we have fits and starts. And the best thing that I can do is go down my own change path and share it with people in my life. If I'm noticing positive changes, I can share it with them, and I can hope they come along with me. Because how well does it happen? What's our instinct when somebody tries to pull us along and drag us?
Doesn't work out so well.
No, we dig our heels in.
Yeah.
We dig our heels in.
Yeah. Suzanne, as it always happens, we're going to run out of time before we run out of things that we want to talk to you about. But one of the things I would like for you to do is, you know, and one of the things I love hearing the message is that in our business, we don't always talk about bad things. We actually talk about good things too. And it's the good things that are eventually we're going to want to focus on. We do have to get the bad things out of the way, but the good things are really our strengths. If somebody, your website and your contact information, somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do we go about doing that, and what's the process of becoming a client of yours?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So my website is www.SuzanneBrownResources, and Suzanne is Suzanne, Brown, BROWN, resources.com. So you can find more about my practice there. And my phone number, you can find all that there, but it's 919-960-1501. So I'd love for people to look me up.
And you're located in Chapel Hill.
I'm located in Chapel Hill, right near University Mall. And like I said, I work directly with folks who meet criteria for substance use disorder and are some phase of active using or in recovery and wanting to maintain that, and also family members who are wanting their own healing and recovery process.
So they could be stepping down from a residential program or an outpatient program.
Correct.
And don't quite need that level of care, and you'd be a great place. Or they could start with you and
They could start with
test the waters and see if this might do them, or they might need something a little more dramatic, I would think, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Suzanne, as you've been in the business for a while now, what are the changes you see in our industry? Anything that makes you happy about our industry? Anything that doesn't make you happy about our industry? You know, Lewis and I talk about it all the time. You know, the business is evolving so fast, and with all the communication, I do know that with all the social media, there's all kinds of new things that we have to worry about. And I would especially think with you dealing with families that you must see some of that with that social media. But what about our business? In a short order, as you can see, we run out of time fast. But anything that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I just love how more people are joining the conversation. It's really reducing the stigma and increasing the chances that people will reach out and get help. Even if my loved one doesn't reach out and get help, I can reach out and get help, right? Which is like a groundbreaking idea, So that is really awesome. And then through the use of social media, there are so many ways we can connect to communities, to know we're not alone, to learn from people who've already been there and done this, because it might be new to me. Recovery and healing and navigating this might be new to me, but I can connect with people who are safe spaces. And there are so many online resources that I think can really be great. And then we're developing more community resources. Wellwyn has been a huge piece of that in this, in the recovery community, of just nurturing relationships, developing resources, so that we can help more people. So I think it's an exciting time for the recovery world.
I agree with you, and I think it's inherent on us as people in the helping industry to certainly highlight the dark moments like we had to do with Kayle, but we also need to celebrate the recoveries, because there's a lot of them, and there's some really neat people out there and that make a difference in so many different people's lives who came from bad places.
Well, I was going to say, Macon, when Suzanne was talking about that, if you had told me 13 years ago that my worst moment that I could remember being in jail in Batavia, New York, would have probably turned out to be my finest hour, or it would have resulted in my finest. Everything I'd accomplished up to that point has paled in comparison to what I feel like I get done now.
Yeah.
It's funny, my life, as Lewis, as we talk, my life has been a highlight reel of, you can't imagine the really cool things that have happened to me, but it seems like today my life is the smallest it's ever been, and it's the most fulfilling it's ever been. And that's interesting, and that's the thing I try and get across to the guys that I speak to my kids as well, that life is so fragile, and you go through so many ups and downs, but perspective, and that's what we're talking about, is perspective, and that all those things. I love those conversations about staying in the moment, about mindfulness, about all those things that are so important, and that at least those conversations are being had now in more public places. And it's not unusual to hear people talk about mindfulness now, and meditation is not it's not what weird people do,
right?
And it used to be, meditation, you had to have long hair, hippie beads, and everything else. And now, almost anybody, all the people I know, there's a quiet moment, and at the start of the day, I know my wife and I do it first thing in the morning. We have that time, and it gives us perspective, and it hopefully will, set our day in motion. And remind us of what's so important, which is the moment. And when you hear the sadness in Kayla's voice, you know what she's going through. And it's it doesn't have to be that way. But this disease, as we have all seen, all three of us have seen, it's a devious and it's a destructive disease, and it will take your life if you allow it to. And so you just have to understand that. But Suzanne, thanks so much.
Thanks for
the work you do, and thank you so much for coming in. Lewis?
Yes.
Tell me something good. I
want to say, Suzanne sitting here, one of the things that I've admired most about her is her unwavering commitment to this cause. There are a handful of people that I've come in contact with since I opened Wellwyn, and that have influenced me, and I've been impressed by. And she is, based on her story and what she's doing, I think the future for addiction recovery is in good hands with this generation.
Thank you. That means a lot, Lewis.
And Lewis, let me also applaud you and your efforts and your company, because you're making things better in your community, and I think that's all of our responsibilities, if we're going to be in the helping profession, is to make our places better. So, Suzanne, you have a safe trip home. Lewis?
Thanks so much.
Yes, sir.
I look forward to having you in here with me next week, and we'll talk with the Pearsons from Samaritan Colony. And thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Good night.
Thank you both.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit The Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.